So thank you so much for being here today. AIRIE has been developing during 2 years a program responding to the question how to make the outdoors a space of belonging. So I think that I would like to start this conversation asking you, Lola, about your experience as an artist in residence in the Everglades, and what does it mean to you, and how do you approach this idea of the outdoors as a space of belonging?
Okay, hello. Can you guys hear me? Okay. Thank you all for coming. I'm really excited to be here with my AIRIE family. Everyone at AIRIE just showed me so much love. And you've heard my names said a couple of times today, so you see what I mean. And also the Rangers were so amazing. They were very excited to see like us artists there. And so that was really helpful to kind of like go places where maybe some of like the regular tourists wouldn't have been able to get here. But I think to start off, thinking about, you know, sort of the elephant in the room, which is that, you know, it's stolen land. So I feel like I had to start there, thinking about the fact that this land was really like my people's land, and now it's been taken. So then to kind of take space and be like, I'm here, and you know, I'm queer, and no one can take this 1 month experience. So just personally, it was really super scary to be there for me. When I first got there, I was just like, the boogeyman's gonna get me. I'm serious, y'all. It was really scary, especially at night, you know, because that still that comes over, and you know, you can see all the stars, but at the same time, I was like scared to step my foot outside because I didn't know if the alligators were gonna come get me or, again, like the boogeyman. But eventually, I actually just really kind of got lulled into the stillness, into the sounds of nature. And I suppose in some ways, like if I was speaking to teenagers, they would all be like, that sounds so corny, but it was really very, I felt like I could you know, sort of explore my soul. I could hear the whispers of my ancestors and think of like what must have been like for them. Some of the conversation that happened earlier about, you know, how was it for them traversing this land. And so I ended up like not wanting to leave at the end of the day. But yeah, I felt my syzygy character, which is why I'm wearing this, this uniform, is, you know, it's basically speaking, thinking about Afrofuturism and using that as a vehicle to think about the past, my ancestors, my sort of Native American grandmother is called Lola, so I was named after her, and she had Native American background. So thinking about her and maybe her grandmother and people in the past. The present, thinking about the incarceration system and how in America it's the worst in anywhere, right? And everyone kind of looks like us in prison, so thinking about that. But then thinking about this future, really, I don't know if I'm talking too long, but just thinking about the future. And in this future I am creating, in this narrative I'm creating, we're all going to be free. Can you believe it? We're going to be free, and we're going to be living on a planet where there was no colonization. So can you imagine, like all the Black and brown people out there, can you imagine actually like going into work or living in an environment where there's no redlining, where there's none of this kind of these preconceived ideas about who you are and how you look, and just starting off at the start line right with everybody else. So it has a happy ending.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned this idea of being in a place out of, you know, colonization, of the impact of colonization, imagining a possible future. And I brought this quote by a scholar, Rebecca Sora, in which she makes reference to there is now here to go where you are not part of the colonial project. A volcano is the only uncontested land. The volcano's danger and undesirability make it perversely attractive. And I was, you know, this idea of finding like a place that could be outside of the colonial history and embracing the volcanoes and the relationship of indigenous communities with this, with this massive of land, you know, of with this natural places, I, of course, make reference to the work of Nadia. And I would like to ask you, Nadia, how do you, specifically last year, there was an eruption of a volcano in San Vicente, and that provoked a change in your practice, a shift in your practice, in the way that so far you have been working mainly focused on submarine representation, on the water representation, and then you started to work on the land as well. So I just want to start this conversation for you to tell us a little bit about your experience in San Vicente and how do you interact with the environment and that experience of belonging.
Thank you, Aldeide. Thank you for inviting me to participate in this panel. You know, I always start off with saying that my practice is kind of amphibious in nature because I'm moving between the land and the sea a lot. About 7 years ago, I started working in the water, underwater, kind of documenting what it's like to be a Caribbean person engaging in that kind of environment, and looking at other people in the space engaging with the water. You know, very often when you see images of the Caribbean, especially in relation to the sea, they're very particular tropes that are replicated, mostly because, most of the Caribbean is obviously a kind of a tourism industry. So the imagery has always been sort of focused on that kind of narrative of particular types of bodies being represented in a specific way in the sea. So whether it's like, you know, sort of scientific documentation of marine life or, you know, tourists enjoying the beach. But a lot of times the people that are actually inhabiting these spaces are invisibilized. And that is the case as well on land. So like a lot of my work is trying to kind of show that experience of what our engagement is with the environment on a day-to-day. And, you know, very sort of everyday, sort of monotonous things, but trying to find interesting ways to present it and create something sort of surprising to look at, you know. But as far as this kind of idea of the submarine and terrestrial, I think going through that volcanic eruption made me sort of realize, well, you know, at some point our islands were underwater. The part of the Caribbean I'm from is the Lesser Antilles, and we're on that sort of volcanic plate. So most of those smaller islands are volcanic islands. And, you know, I've been trying to kind of think about like what it would have been like geologically to have the Caribbean have been underwater at one point, and now, you know, you have these kind of catastrophes happening over a span of time and, you know, geological time that eventually kind of creates these islands that people have inhabited for many years, whether they've, you know, sort of been the first people there or been brought there by force or whatever. So we're kind of like evolving with the land in a way. So I don't really see the landscape as necessarily separate from that submarine environment. I actually see them as very much connected because, you know, if you were to do a cross-section of the Caribbean, like what does an island look like down to the core of the earth, you know what I mean? There's many layers of things happening. We are just one species on an island. I mean, it's made up of so many different multi-species and bacteria and rocks and minerals and all types of stuff. So I think, I kind of approach my practice in a very holistic sense and really sort of look at everything as a part of the makeup of an island, not just us. I mean, you know, obviously human beings have a very particular experience inhabiting spaces, and we want to survive. We want to like continue to grow and thrive and live in these spaces. But I think the way my practice has changed in recent years is really kind of expanding my notion of what belongs where, like who belongs where, what belongs where, and it's not just limited to human.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we will continue in that conversation. But I also want to ask Adama about, because, well, you know, I have been following your work a lot, and you have this series that you created in Argentina. And when I was, you know, planning this conversation, I was thinking how through your practice we can understand that environmental discussion, because it may be, we can say, like more evident in the work of Lola or in the work of Nadia, but not necessarily in your work. But I was very interested on the intersectionality of environmental issues and colonial histories. So if you can speak a little bit about that connectivity or that relationship that is established in your work between the environmental and the colonial legacy.
Thank you. And again, thank you everyone for being here. And it's an honor to be on this panel with all of you. And yeah, I think that it's really important to recognize that the colonial project is actually why we're experiencing this climate situation today. It is completely linked. And so I think about the importance of indigenous knowledge, right? Because as I even, dissect my own identity, it's one thing for me to talk about being from Sierra Leone, which is the colonial name for the place that I'm from, or to go into who are the people that I'm from. I'm Mende, I'm Bamileke, I'm Krim. That gives me specific people who had a specific way of dealing with the environment. And there's no separation between it. It is a holistic way of being, and everything is connected. So that's what I'm really interested in the idea, because when we look at colonial thought, we are separate from the environment. In these indigenous ontologies and cosmologies, there's no difference. We are all one thing, and we're all connected and different at the same time. So, and also to think about the way that, we use diversity today in inclusion as a way, it's really interesting to have that conversation, but to also think about the idea that this earth, the physical earth, functions on extreme diversity. And we are extremely diverse people when you go back to these indigenous people across the whole entire globe who, depending on where they are, they have a way to care for and to commune with the earth and the cosmos. And so it's important to know that that could be possible, and we're one at the same time, because we live in a place we live on one earth. There's not like a million earths, it's one. And so when you think about it like that, that's how I've been thinking about the way that I'm making work. So when I went to Argentina, it was important for me to research who were the people there, like strip away Argentina, think about who was there first, right? Mm-hmm. And then also think about the people who were brought there as enslaved people, the African people who were brought as enslaved people. And the idea, again, of the colonial project to attempt to erase histories and the violence in that. And so for me, it's important to mine into the archive. And while I was there, I always embody indigenous African spiritual thought within my work, because I feel like, again, the spiritual aspect is not separated. If we look behind us at the wind is moving the trees, the ocean is moving at a certain pace, right? We are connected to the ocean and to the moon and to everything. Like, it's all one thing. Mm-hmm. And so for me, it was important while I was there to think about those histories and embody this. So if you look at the work, I'm dressed in blue and I'm against these colonial walls. But if you look, it's like, who is the spiritual being in this place, taking up space, honoring space, and honoring the ancestors? And so, yeah, that's really in all of the work that I do. And if you're not thinking deep enough about it, it's all connected to the environment, because there's no separation, exactly. Right? And really, they're all in these natural spaces. And I am meditating in the spaces. I am sitting down. I am thinking about the trees. Some of the things that I question: what do the trees remember? What does the ocean remember? What does the ground remember? And what does it feel to actually place my feet on the ground or submerged in the water or the lake as I'm making this work? It's not just take the photo, but I'm actually experiencing something. And the work is about capturing this experience. I hate to use that word capture, but more, right? Even the words, right? Observing and being a part of the experience and sharing that with other people. And hopefully we can start to think of ourselves differently, because, okay, we can imagine the futures, right, that are not colonially rooted, right? Mm-hmm. But right now, I feel it's really important for us to at least document this expression of fighting against this thing for future generations. So I figure when I'm doing this work now, I may not see the impact now. Collectively, we may not see the impact now, but we are doing something for the future, right? And that's really important and solid because the Colonial Project was not a one-year project, right? We're still experiencing that right now, but we need to be thinking about literally how will people sustain themselves hundreds of years from now? And I think that that's what we're thinking about now.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I've been thinking about where all this conversation, I was going around this idea of Black feminist ecopoetics in photography, and I was trying to center a discussion about this notion. And specifically, I am taking as a reference Dr. Chelsea Mikhaile Fraser, who is a scholar working at the intersection of Black feminist literature and theory and environmental humanities. And one of the main questions that she posed is, what is the function of Black art in a time of ecological crisis? What kind of problems or questions arise when we place the work of Black femme bodies at the center? So if you want to respond to that.
I like to think, I have a video that I made and it's called The Cleanse, and it was really inspired by the research of Dr. Sylvia Arden Boone, who was a professor at Yale University, a forward-thinking anthropologist who looked at anthropology not in the way of we're studying those people, but how do I use this indigenous knowledge of Mende people in order to center the African and Black woman body as something that is just beautiful, right? And when I say beauty, I'm not talking about in the superficial way, but more so as understanding that this way of being and seeing in the world is like, beauty is everything natural that comes from us, right? And so, so what I think the artist's job, well, the responsibility that I take on is to do that research, to bring, the work is here. We're not making this up, it's here. So how do we shed light on that research that's been here? How do we, again, go in and tell these stories and center ourselves? Because as, you know, women or people of African descent or of color, however we're describing that indigenous descent, again, it is centering something that has not been centered as we know it, right? Mm-hmm. But has been centered when we go deeper into these cosmologies.
Yeah. Nadia, maybe you want to speak a little bit about thinking on impact on your work, how it has, all your practice also have like an activist component. And for me, it's very important how you practice, you know, you are proposing in a very creative way, how we call it, like other potential stories. You are creating these counter narratives, but also your work has had like a direct impact in your community in St. Vincent. So maybe you can speak a little bit about how you have been creating this archive, this visual archive that have preserved or have allowed you to protect in a certain way the impact of the real estate companies in St. Vincent, in the damage to the ecosystem.
Yeah, I mean, I essentially have been trying to kind of build this ecological archive of images. So again, you know, like looking at very sort of everyday things in the ocean. I'd been documenting a lot of the coral reefs on the beach that I grew up on, that I photographed most of my underwater work. You know, and like it's home at the end of the day. Like I've spent my entire life there. I know where every piece of coral is. I've seen how it's looked from being a child right up to this age. So it's impactful when you see these physical changes happening in your environment and you know that you had far more sand on the beach at one point in your life. And you can see these changes happening in real time over a span of time. It doesn't happen in one day. It's like you really have to be situated in a place for like a number of years to see these changes happen. And you know, as a result of that, I started doing all this documentation of reefs and not really knowing why I was doing it. I got a camera and I was like, okay, this is interesting to look at. I know this is familiar. And I started documenting those changes over time. And I did that for about 4 years, photographing these reefs. And, you know, out of that had sort of created this body of work, the Transformation series, where my body is sort of like trying to merge with this marine environment. So, you know, the work took on a very kind of conceptual approach. And, you know, like a lot of what I do is kind of creating this mythology of these creolized bodies, in this case, my own body, sort of engaging with this environmental archive. But because I had done all this work documenting this reef, just not too long after the volcano erupted, there was a hotel development that was kind of, you know, like a new investor had bought it, and they were proposing to rip out this very living reef in front of the beach to make the beach, you know, to beautify the beach, to make it more like accessible for people to get in, because it's not really the safest place to walk into. I mean, you'll get, you know, you'll step on urchins and everything. So, but it was just like this idea of having to like clean the beach up, although like this reef was serving a very functional purpose, you know, protecting the coastline, acting as a nursery for all this marine life. And, you know, in addition, it was a conservation zone. And, you know, I kind of realized what they were trying to do. They went about it very sneakily, and didn't really, you know, try to publicize it too much. And, you know, I happened to get word of it, and I responded publicly to it, and I started sharing all these images I had taken of the reef. And, you know, and meanwhile, it's like in the media, like they're trying to kind of demonize me, saying the images are fake, and then, you know, unfortunately for them, I like take like GPS coordinates of everything, and so it was, you know, I mean, I didn't do the work with the intention of necessarily responding to that situation, but I had all these images that I had been documenting that was able to respond. So you know, the images, the project ended up taking on a whole different kind of approach, and from the images, I was kind of able to build a campaign pushing back against them to prevent them from trying to remove this reef. And once the public got a hold of it, there was like a huge outcry, and it was really touching because, you know, like the beach is one of the few beaches on the island that most of the people on the island come to and swim. It's very accessible, and I think people just felt like the need to protect it at the end of the day. I mean, you know, of course we want to see these developments happen. We want, you know, we want to see our country thrive, and all of these developments really make a difference, but not at the expense of something that's sustaining our life, you know, because at the end of the day, a lot of these projects come into our island, you know, they promise us grand things, and then 3 years later we have an abandoned building that we have to reckon with and a destroyed beach, you know? So it's like, you know, at the end of the day, like we have to kind of negotiate these relationships we have with these types of projects. I mean, yes, you know, by all means, like we understand that you do have to kind of allow certain things to happen in the name of progress, but we also have to kind of figure out like how to negotiate how we move forward with doing certain types of developments.
I was, whereas part of this eco-poetics, I think one of the elements that were of similar, and you have been, even when you are speaking and you are, you know, making reference to creating new mythologies, or, you know, creating new stories, or the idea of ancestral knowledge. I think that's like a common experience in all your practice. But I am also very interested in the relationship with water and how it gets different meanings in your work. I mean, in some cases, water is a space of liberation. I know, for example, in Nadia, in your work, is about this space that you have made reference how when we are in the water, we are not male, we are not women. It's like this gender fluid space, but also water could be a space of frustration. It could be a space of vulnerability. And I think that we can see that in the work of Lola. And then also the idea of water as legacy, or as a trauma, as that a space that connects us, but as well makes reference to, of course, the Middle Passage, the transatlantic voyage. So maybe, Lola, you want to speak a little bit more about the implication of water. That is something that you are even working recently, even more in your practice.
Yeah, and thanks for that work, Nadia. It's amazing. I think I know that water has always been a really big part of my work, and as you said, you know, thinking about how me and my family got here as African Americans. So, you know, I sometimes think about those people that jumped ship, who were smart enough to know what was to come. And I think of them like at the bottom of the sea with like, they're sort of like these Afro mermaids, and they're at the bottom of the sea playing cards and drinking beer. And they're like, you know, we missed that one. But so, you know, my surpassing series, for instance, I often will have water in the background. I never really talk much about it, but it was kind of like a part of it. And actually, when I started focusing more about water, the first person I reached out to was you, Nadia. I was like, so what camera are you using for your underwater stuff? And so, you know, and also, you know, we're really good friends. Delphine and I are really good friends. So it's wonderful to have such a beautiful community of folks that you can, you know, spar off of or answer, you know, ask questions about even boring technical stuff. And so with the underwater stuff I've been doing recently with Syzygy, which is the character that I become when I'm in my series, yeah, I think there's a sense of freedom when I'm in the water, but a lot of the water I've been doing is just like in the pool. So, you know, I know that there's not going to be any big animals out in the water. So I don't know, I'd like to go someplace, I'm hoping to get a grant to go someplace where there's some clear waters that I can do some underwater photography. Right now I've just been doing pools. So just like in life and just like in this series, there's some of the images are very joyful. There's one where I think it's hard to kind of see, but there's one where I always have these kind of like angel wings. And then there's another one where I'm just like, you know, getting ready for the cops. And so it's been ranging. It's definitely like, I think it's at the experimental stage right now for me now. But thinking about like the Mississippi River is like, is having a drought. So many people, so many places on the continent, there's drought and people are dying and food is not being able to be, you know, grown. And so I think that was one of the beautiful things about being at AIRIE and being in the Everglades, was just seeing this beautiful water that's clean as like drinking water, you know, from the way that it gets filtered from the grass, right? And so just seeing this, the way that a natural environment can work when people care about it and make it work properly. And then thinking about like, why are all these droughts happening? Why aren't there like, isn't there infrastructure to make it such that these places have water? I mean, if the world is 3/4 water, how can there be drought? So, you know, yeah, but I've been really enjoying the water and thinking more about, I think when you live in the city in New York and you see, like I can count the amount of trees outside my window that I can see. I think when one comes to a place where there's more nature that can be around it, you can think more about it and just, and feel so blessed that, you know, we still have trees giving us, you know, oxygen.
Yeah. I want to open to questions because I know there are a lot of women artists in our audience, and this program is for us, for celebrating ourselves. And I know there are different artists that work with the topic of environmental issues. And I have this question, you know, how do women photographers imagine environmental futures? So if any of you want to even respond from your own perspective, or you want to make a question to our panelists, please do so now. Yes?
So I just have a question about, you know, a lot of the conversation has been surrounded around the colonial project, right? And I wonder, as photographers, how do you grapple with the idea or the fact that the camera itself has been a tool of colonization? Like, do you think about that in your work, or how do you encounter that and negotiate that in your work? Thank you.
I definitely think about that, and I spend a lot of time breaking the frame and challenging the notion of what we consider to be photography with my work. So the latest series, Water Bodies, is I'm in conversation with my grandmother's textiles. She was from Pujol in Sierra Leone, and so I've been using non-traditional photographic processes more so as a way of making these textiles and, using the sun as a way to process work and create imagery, and just kind of like, again, just breaking the rules, like, because it's something that I think about all the time. Even as a photography professor, that's the first lesson as we talk about, this thing that we have is a colonial tool. And we've even been reading which is a great book to read, which we start our semester off with the, now I'm missing the title of the name of the book. That challenges your book, Dr. Dev. That challenges the Zili daguerreotypes. We go there first to understand that we are using this colonial tool, and how do we not continue that pattern but break it? So it's very important to my practice.
Okay, I think that's a great question. I feel like personally, just by being female and using the camera is one way that I break it. I noticed you said capture, and so I think making sure that we're using words that we've changed, right? So I mean, Malcolm X was like, there's no change going to happen unless we change our vocabulary. And for me, like, there's a real dialogue between the sitter and myself. I always feel like, I always say, I'd be nothing without my models. So I always feel like it's a collaboration, and I'm not just going there to just grab them, grab their souls. So all of my work, if there's any, I don't think there's any models out there right now, but they hear me that, I just am so thankful that people have for decades trusted me and let me include them in different projects. And I think that for me, I also make sure that I give the names of the other models, the sitters. I make sure that that people understand that it's a conversation. It's not just like Lola Flash has this great idea and now look at it. You know what I mean? So I think that's important. So I think back in the day, photographers were like, I made that person, but that's not the case. I had one other thought, but I kind of spaced out on that one. But that's a bit of what I do.
I mean, I think I'm also very aware of it. Cameras obviously come from a very specific history, but again, like just inhabiting the body that I'm in and holding it and using it. I mean, I will always be able to present a different narrative, just being who I am, being where I'm from. Like a lot of the images that we see of the Caribbean are usually photographed by people from the outside coming in. And very few images like that are done in a very kind of critical way are done from people from the inside. And some islands have a much longer history of photography, like Cuba, for example, the much richer history of photography. I mean, some of the Anglophone islands in the Lesser Antilles, I mean, the way that the camera is used as a tool there has mostly been commercial or, again, like scientific documentation. So, yeah, I think for me, it's just a matter of like presenting whatever my ideas might be,
From my
Hello. Oh, okay. Yeah, I wanted to also mention highlighting those histories of people who, have been victims of the colonial project through photography. Since its inception, we have been fighting it by being photographers. So I think it's really important to know that we are not the first generation or the second or the third. Like we've been making these photographs, from since the beginning of the medium itself.
I will respond from my perspective as an art historian and looking to the work of these artists, thinking on how women artists have been challenging the colonial history of photography. And specifically, I want to emphasize in some of the elements that I consider, characteristic of the colonial approach to photography. One of them is the right to opacity, and is, to have the understanding that not everything needs to be told, not everything needs to be photographed. And for example, when you see the work of Nadia, that's something that for example, when you have this photograph of the Black guys under the water, you are always trying to remove or, not showing like their faces, trying to protect that, their identities. Or even other of the ways, even honoring our ancestors, honoring the people that have been behind us, but also considering photography as a collaborative practice, as a process of interaction, of conversation, of building a relationship with that person that you are being photographing. Is there any other question? I think we don't have too many more time. George?
In our gathering today, we have been listening and dealing with concepts and words relating to your explorations and not so much looking at your work. And I'm interested to know to what degree you utilize words, whether spoken or printed, to help convey the message that's embedded in your photographic work. And how essential do you feel that it is? I mean, there's this notion that artwork can stand on its own, and yet we all know that our experience is often enriched by conversation, as exemplified by this gathering today. And so any of you who'd like to speak about that, I appreciate it.
I mean, I think my work is less joined with text. Most times I just sort of present images and it's obvious what I'm trying to portray, so I don't feel the need to interject with words all the time. Although, for example, with the case with the reef activism, words need to be associated with that because people need to understand what that relationship is. So, I had a slogan that I would put over the images: protect what protects you. Like, for example, like it's important for people to be able to associate something, why this so-called dead reef is important for you to connect to. And I think, words do play a very important role in photography, but I also think sometimes it's important for people to just engage with images because we all read language in a different way. Some people have the capacity to consume text and pick apart and use that to enrich their lives, and some people, can just look at an image and that can impact them and transform them in very important ways. But I use these sort of opportunities, to expand on my practice, and I'll have people write about my work, and I try to share as much of my thoughts as possible in what I'm doing, but I want people to engage with the image first because it's the image of the Caribbean that people see first. They don't hear the words, they don't read the words, they see the images. And part of what I'm trying to do with my practice is to kind of break that narrative and those kind of stereotypical, images that we've seen coming out to the region. And I think there are a lot of artists in the Caribbean who are trying to do that. So I'm not, it's not just me alone sort of working towards this much greater agenda. There's a team of us trying to really kind of change the way people see the region.
Hello? Okay. Text is a very important part of my work because I feel like through the language, you get to know, like the etymology of language, you get to know the histories and everything. So, and I'm always reading and I really enjoy text, but I never write anything to make people understand the work. Because like you, Nadia, I think it's important for people to do the work in order to understand. But I do love to use titles. So in the titles of the pieces, like for instance, one of the pieces is called Black Like Blue in Argentina. Go figure it out, or Watabodi. Like sometimes I will use the language, a language that is not English in the work. Or if I'm making videos, sound is extremely important to me in the videos. And I do a lot of overlayering of found text along with maybe you might hear something in Mende to kind of make the experience more inclusive. But I use text all the time, but also in a way to allow the viewer to go and dig in a little bit, do the work. I think it's very important for us as people who take in art to do the extra work. Whether it means picking up a book or doing extra research or something, we just share with you so much of what, you know, we've been experiencing, and it's great to have people go ahead and meet us halfway and come and do the work as well.
Thank you.
I'll just add real quickly, pretty much everything that each of these people said. And also, there's something I love about art where it doesn't matter what language one speaks. You know, for the most part, there are some cultural differences around colors and things like that. But, you know, that someone from anywhere in the world can look at my work or our work and make their own interpretation of it. But I also do with titles. I love to like think about music, because I think there's there's so many things we could all be on a panel about, but I think, you know, music is a very important part for me, and so I love to think about music titles to then add to create for my titles for my work. And like Del, I suppose I've been really influenced with a lot of your video work. I've started doing a little bit more video with my Cisgies because again, the sounds, you know, if I'm like sort of by the side of a water and I'm like rocking, and then the sound of the water just kind of like emphasizes what the feeling is. So I've been doing a little bit more video stuff. So.
Lola, because something that I've been thinking about a lot with this work is how do people use their senses other than just the visual sense? I believe that you can feel the work, you could hear it, even when there's no, you know, you're not physically touching the work and you're not necessarily listening to something. There are like our senses, which this goes back to this conversation around climate and different, you know, old school thought is that we are more than just the verbal. Like we are multisensory human beings. And when, you know when I'm making the installation, it's more so about what the person feels. Sometimes those things that you can't even explain with words is something really important to me, and something that I've been, thinking about a lot, even as I'm making new work.
And I just want to say that if you want to see the work of these artists, where tonight the Betsy Hotel is doing our Miami Week art reception, in where you can see the work of Nadia. We had an exhibition at the Betsy Hotel from September 22nd through November 22nd, but still you are able to see a special project in the Vivar Gallery, and as well other of her work is available. You can see it in the main gallery along with another artist, Tamari Kudita, and even the Willis, who is here today with us. She will be presenting tonight, doing some signing. Thank you so much, Deb, for being here. And yes, so I invite you all to join us during the evening. Then, of course, at WOPHA, where for those who know me, I believe in supporting artists in a long term. So they are part of the WOPHA family. Adama is one of the artists in residence at Fontehead. She's coming again in June, I think, next year, and we will be doing some activations while she's here in the city, and we are planning a group exhibition as well with their work around this topic that we have been discussing today. Thank you so much for being here. Also, we have outside the photo book that we produce, Becoming Sisters, in which the work of Lola and the work of Adama is featured, so you can acquire, and that supports a lot our organization. And of course, you are welcome to become members of WOPHA, to follow us on social media, Instagram, WOPHA Foundation, to subscribe to our newsletter, and we'll continue supporting the work that we do in partnership with other organizations in Miami and across the world. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you.